The galaxy was a vast expanse of stars and systems controlled by the Triumvirate, a powerful empire that stretched across 1,000 worlds, its grip on the galaxy so tight that few ever questioned its rule. The species of the galaxy bowed to the Triumvirate's demands, from trade agreements to military dominance. The empire had it all. Humanity was a mere afterthought among the stars, their technology primitive, compared to the empires that ruled across the void. Still, they had made their mark, just beginning to explore and expand across the galaxy when the unexpected happened. A lone ship appeared in the farthest reaches of space. It was a dark vessel, sleek and angular, its hull lined with intricate designs that betrayed a craftsmanship far beyond what the Triumvirate had expected to encounter. Humanity had long been dismissed by the galactic elite as nothing more than a novelty, at best a curiosity at worst. No one had expected them to possess anything even remotely close to a warship capable of challenging the Empire. The ship was the SS Valiant, a creation of the finest minds of Earth and the combined ingenuity of humanity's engineers. It was armed with technologies that defied the norms of galactic warfare and designed with a purpose to fight against impossible odds. At first, the Triumvirate believed it to be a fluke, a single vessel not worth their attention, perhaps a mere scout or an isolated experiment, something they could easily neutralize with their overwhelming power. They laughed it off dismissively and continued their operations throughout the galaxy, their fleet of mighty warships far superior to anything the human race could field. But when the SS Valiant struck, it struck without mercy or hesitation. The Triumvirate's patrol fleet was caught completely off guard as the human ship tore through the Empire's lines, using tactics they could not anticipate. No one had ever dared attack the Triumvirate so brazenly, and no one had ever expected a species like humanity to possess such audacity or capability. The Valiant seemed to move with a fluidity that left its enemies unsure of where it would strike next. Its weapons unleashed waves of devastating firepower, yet its crew managed to avoid direct confrontation by utilizing the environment and clever maneuvers to stay one step ahead. It was as if the human ship knew its opponents better than they knew themselves. It wasn't long before the Triumvirate's commanders realized they had made a grave mistake underestimating the humans. The Valiant's first strike against one of their mid-tier fleets resulted in the destruction of several key ships and their flagship in less than an hour, with minimal losses on the human side. The reports that followed were enough to send ripples throughout the galaxy. The Triumvirate's arrogance had been shattered for the first time in centuries. Their once invincible empire had been forced to deal with an adversary they could not easily crush, and as the SS Valiant disappeared into the depths of space, the message was clear: humanity was no longer the insignificant species it had once been. They were a force to be reckoned with. Across the stars, many saw this as the spark of a revolution. Others trembled in fear, wondering what this would mean for the future of the galaxy. Some began to wonder if the Triumvirate was truly as invincible as they had always believed. But the truth was only beginning to unfold, and humanity's role in the galaxy was about to change forever. The Triumvirate's command centers buzzed with activity as the news of the SS Valiant's success spread like wildfire across their fleet. It was the first time in centuries that the Empire had faced a genuine threat that wasn't easily extinguished. The elite fleet of the Triumvirate, the Imperium, was immediately mobilized. Composed of their most experienced commanders and backed by their most advanced ships, the Imperium had been designed to crush rebellions and put down uprisings across the galaxy. Now they would face the unknown, the human warship that had already made a mockery of their fleets. Admiral Terran Kolrath, one of the Triumvirate's fiercest leaders, was tasked with eliminating the human threat. His reputation had been forged in countless battles, his strategies flawless, his victories celebrated. He believed the Valiant was a one-off, a mere stroke of luck. The Empire's overwhelming might would squash it with ease. At least that was the plan. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Celine Rourke and the Valiant's crew were preparing for their next move. They knew they were about to be hunted, but they also knew the one thing that the Triumvirate didn't understand about humanity. The will to survive was stronger than any fleet. The Valiant was no longer just a ship. It had become a symbol, a rallying point for every oppressed species that had lived under the Empire's heel. But Rourke wasn't delusional. She knew that the Triumvirate would come after them with everything they had, and the human warship was outmatched. The SS Valiant was faster, more agile, and more unpredictable than anything the Empire had encountered, but its weapons were no match for the sheer firepower of the Imperium fleet. Yet, as Rourke analyzed the situation, she realized that her crew had one key advantage. They could think outside the box. The Triumvirate had built its reputation on overwhelming force, on crushing enemies beneath the weight of their technology. But the Valiant was not designed for brute force. It was designed for precision, for cunning, for making the most out of every situation. The Imperium arrived on the fringes of the human-controlled sector, their ships dwarfing the Valiant in sheer size and number. Kolrath ordered his ships to form a tight formation, a standard tactic that had worked time and again. But Rourke wasn't about to play by their rules. As the Imperium moved into position, the Valiant vanished into the nearby asteroid field, using the dense rock formations to cloak its presence. The Triumvirate's ships were left scanning empty space, their sensors overloaded, unable to detect the human ship. Rourke smiled as her crew prepared the next phase. The Triumvirate was predictable, and they had just walked right into her trap. The Valiant launched a sudden strike, moving with lightning speed from the shadows of the asteroids. Precision strikes hit the flanks of the Imperium's formation, disabling their engines and causing chaos. The Imperium commanders scrambled to reorganize, but the human warship was already gone, darting back into the field, ready to strike again. Kolrath's rage was palpable as he watched the Valiant hit and fade. His elite fleet had never been outmaneuvered like this. His pride, his reputation, was on the line. Every blow the Imperium took seemed to damage not just their ships, but their morale. Each failure made them more vulnerable, more desperate. And as the Triumvirate's ships began to split apart in confusion, Rourke gave the order to launch one final assault. This time, they wouldn't just fade into the shadows. The Valiant came out with full force, blasting through the weakest points of the Imperium's formation. The SS Valiant was not just a ship now. It was a statement. Humanity was here, and they weren't going to be crushed so easily. The Imperium was left reeling, unable to recover from the loss of their most prized ships. Admiral Kolrath knew it was over. He had underestimated the humans, and now he would have to report a crushing defeat. The message was clear to the galaxy. The Triumvirate was not invincible, and humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The SS Valiant's unexpected victories had sent shockwaves through the galaxy, and for the first time in centuries, the once unshakable Triumvirate was beginning to show cracks in its armor. Across the stars, the once silent masses of oppressed civilizations began to whisper in secret, exchanging stories of a human warship that had decimated the Empire's fleets. The Valiant had not only delivered a blow to the Triumvirate, it had delivered hope. Hope that perhaps the long reign of the Empire could finally be broken. Across countless worlds, rumors of humanity's audacity spread. Some factions, long broken by the iron fist of the Triumvirate, began to believe that the impossible might be achievable. The Valiant's success was not just an isolated victory. It was a spark in the dark, a flame that began to ignite rebellion where there had been none. The Triumvirate's grip on its territories began to loosen, and in the shadows, resistance cells began to form, united under the belief that the time to act had come. The galaxy, once united under the rule of the Empire, was starting to fracture. On one hand, civilizations that had lived under the Triumvirate's rule for centuries knew the consequences of defying it. They feared the retribution the Empire would exact. On the other hand, they feared the Valiant even more. For the first time, they saw an opening, a chance to break free from tyranny. And they began to ask themselves, could humanity be the key to defeating the Triumvirate? But not every civilization saw the Valiant as a sign of hope. For some, humanity was just another threat to their own survival. The galaxy was a treacherous place, filled with species more interested in maintaining their own power than liberating others. These factions, from the cold and calculating Zithar to the militaristic Kareth, viewed the humans as a dangerous unknown. They feared the growing power of the human warship and what it might mean for their own position in the galaxy. As the whispers of rebellion grew louder, the triumvirate's response was swift. They were not blind to the unrest swelling across their empire. They could feel the galaxy shifting, and they understood the gravity of the threat posed by the Valiant. But their arrogance had clouded their judgment. The Empire's leaders had always relied on their technological superiority to crush any opposition, to make all who challenged them bow before their might. But now, they were facing an enemy they didn't fully understand, a species that defied every expectation. Admiral Kolrath, still reeling from the defeat of the Imperium fleet, found himself at the center of an empire in turmoil. He was no longer the unchallenged hero of the triumvirate. He was a man on the edge, struggling to salvage what little remained of his reputation. The Valiant was not just a ship now. It was a symbol, a rallying cry that echoed throughout the galaxy. And as long as humanity continued to strike fear into the heart of the Empire, the triumvirate's rule was in jeopardy. As the triumvirate scrambled to respond, something unexpected began to happen. Representatives from different species, beings who had lived under the Empire's yoke for generations, quietly reached out to the Valiant's crew. They began to offer their support, not just in terms of weapons or resources, but in intelligence and strategy. Humanity's victories had caught the attention of more than just the oppressed. It had caught the attention of those with the power to tip the balance of the galaxy. These new allies were cautious, reluctant to fully commit to open rebellion, but they shared one common goal: the overthrow of the triumvirate. Humanity, with its warship and its ferocious spirit, was now at the center of an intergalactic movement that had the potential to change the entire galaxy. As Captain Rourke and her crew watched this tide of change unfold, they knew that the Valiant could not stand alone. To bring down the triumvirate, they would need more than just one ship. They would need an army. The resistance was growing, but it needed leadership, coordination, and, most importantly, a decisive strike against the heart of the Empire. The galaxy was waiting for someone to lead them, and the Valiant had become humanity's symbol of defiance. The galaxy was changing. What had once seemed like an impossible dream, a galaxy free from the triumvirate's oppressive rule, was now an undeniable possibility. Resistance movements, once fragmented and disorganized, began to coalesce into something more substantial, driven by the beacon of hope the SS Valiant had sparked. The Valiant wasn't just a warship. It was the spearhead of a revolution, a symbol that the old order could be overthrown. Captain Celine Rourke stood on the command deck, her eyes scanning the star charts before her. The Valiant had been in hiding for several weeks, moving from one remote system to the next, staying one step ahead of the triumvirate's forces. The ship had become a ghost, disappearing into the vastness of space after each successful strike. But with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. The triumvirate's retaliation would not be far behind, and the pressure was mounting. Rourke knew they couldn't hide forever. The Valiant's crew had already struck fear into the Empire. Now it was time to press forward and take the fight to them. The resistance was growing stronger, but there were still significant obstacles. Various factions of the rebellion, though united in their hatred of the triumvirate, were hesitant to fully trust one another. Old rivalries, political infighting, and fears of betrayal lingered like a shadow over their alliance. It was a delicate balance, and one that could easily fall apart without proper leadership. Rourke knew that as the figurehead of this movement, she had to find a way to bring the disparate forces together, to unite them under one cause if they were to have any hope of toppling the Empire. But even with the newfound alliances, the Valiant was only one ship, one powerful but vulnerable force against an empire with fleets of warships, weapons of mass destruction, and decades of galactic domination. The triumvirate's military might was still far beyond anything the rebellion could muster. Rourke's strategy was clear. They needed to strike quickly and decisively. The Valiant would be their spearhead, but the rebellion's strength would come from its ability to hit the triumvirate where it hurt the most, its supply lines, its communication networks, and, ultimately, its command centers. As work prepared for the next phase of the war, a new opportunity presented itself. A source within the triumvirate, a former high-ranking officer who had defected to the rebellion, sent word that a critical triumvirate base, a massive communications hub on the fringe of their capital system, was vulnerable. It was a risk, but it was an opportunity to cripple the Empire's ability to coordinate its forces. If they could disrupt the communications grid, the triumvirate would be thrown into chaos, and the rebellion would have the advantage. Rourke gathered her officers for a briefing, the air in the war room thick with tension. She had already made her decision. The Valiant would lead the charge, striking deep into triumvirate space. The crew, well aware of the dangers, braced for what was to come. It would be a daring raid, a bold move that could shift the balance of power. Failure would mean certain death for them all, but success would bring them one step closer to victory. "Get ready," Rourke said, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. We strike hard, and we strike fast. If we succeed, the triumvirate won't know what hit them. And if we fail, well, we'll go down knowing we did what no one thought possible. We gave them a reason to fear us." Her words, simple yet powerful, echoed through the room, inspiring her crew to stand a little taller, to feel the weight of their mission a little less. They were no longer just humans, no longer just the crew of a lone warship. They were the spark of a revolution, the tip of the spear that would bring down a galactic empire. As the Valiant prepared to launch, the crew's resolve solidified. The triumvirate may have had the numbers, the power, and the resources, but they didn't have humanity's spirit, and that, in the end, would be their greatest downfall. The galaxy held its breath as the SS Valiant cut through the stars, heading directly into the heart of the triumvirate's territory. Captain Rourke knew this mission would define everything: the rebellion's future, humanity's place in the galaxy, and whether or not they could truly challenge an empire that had reigned for centuries. Their target was a communications hub that sat on the fringe of the triumvirate's capital system, a fortress of technology and strategy that held the entire military apparatus of the empire together. If they could disrupt this, they would sever the triumvirate's ability to coordinate its fleets, and the resulting chaos would give the galaxy's fledgling resistance a fighting chance. But the Valiant wasn't the only ship on the move. The triumvirate, now fully aware of humanity's audacity and growing capabilities, had been preparing a counterstrike. Their most powerful asset, the Dreadnought Conqueror, a massive battleship capable of laying waste to entire planets, had been dispatched to intercept and crush the Valiant before it could reach its target. This was no longer a simple skirmish. It was a battle for survival, one that would determine whether the triumvirate would remain the unchallenged masters of the galaxy, or whether humanity and its allies would turn the tide. Rourke watched as the Dreadnought Conqueror's ominous silhouette appeared on the scanners, growing ever larger. The ship was a behemoth, dwarfing the Valiant in size and firepower. Yet, in the face of overwhelming odds, Rourke's resolve only hardened. She had seen what humanity was capable of when they had nothing left to lose. The Valiant was outgunned, outnumbered, and facing an opponent that could destroy them with a single shot. But Rourke was certain of one thing: the triumvirate had never encountered a force like this before. "All hands, prepare for combat." Rourke's voice rang out over the intercom, a calm certainty in her tone that steadied the nerves of her crew. "We don't have the firepower to go toe-to-toe with the Conqueror. We'll fight smart, we'll fight fast, and we'll make them regret ever underestimating us." The Valiant darted toward the Dreadnought Conqueror, weaving through asteroid fields and debris in an attempt to throw off its targeting systems. The Conqueror fired massive bolts of energy that cracked asteroids in half, but Rourke's crew was prepared. They had trained for moments like this, knowing that their only chance was to use the environment to their advantage. The Valiant zigzagged through the chaos, launching decoys that temporarily confused the Conqueror's targeting systems. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, one that forced the Conqueror to divert its attention. The triumvirate's ship was a floating fortress, its weapons nearly unstoppable, but its size made it a slow-moving target. The Valiant, on the other hand, was nimble and precise, using speed to its advantage. Every time the Conqueror thought it had locked onto the human ship, the Valiant would slip into another blind spot or launch another surprise strike. As the two ships engaged in a brutal chase, the resistance fighters began their part of the mission. Multiple smaller ships, now coordinated and organized under Orcs' command, began their assault on the triumvirate's communications hub. A series of well-timed attacks crippled the outer defenses, allowing the rebels to breach the core systems. The plan was working. The triumvirate's communications began to falter, their lines of command disrupted. The galaxy-wide network that had kept the Empire in control was starting to unravel. But the dreadnought Conqueror wasn't finished yet. With a roar of defiance, the massive battleship unleashed its full might, targeting the Valiant with its most devastating weapon, an energy pulse that could wipe out entire fleets. The blast struck the Valiant, sending the ship reeling and systems flashing red. For a moment, it seemed as if the Valiant might not survive. The hull groaned under the assault, and sparks flew from the control panels as the ship's engines sputtered. "Get us back on course," Rourke shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She could feel the tension in the air, but there was no time for panic. The mission had to succeed. Her crew was determined. Against all odds, the Valiant stabilized, just as a final strike from the Conqueror would have sealed their fate. The Valiant fired one last precise shot, targeting the dreadnought Conqueror's primary power core, the only weak spot the Triumvirate's engineers had failed to properly shield. With a sudden, gut-wrenching explosion, the Conqueror was crippled, its core overloaded and its weapon systems disabled. The battle was over. The dreadnought Conqueror was down, and the communications hub had been sabotaged. The Triumvirate's grip on the galaxy was slipping. The rebellion's first crew victory had been achieved, and humanity had delivered the blow that would echo through the stars. The horizon surged forward, its engines humming steadily, as it ventured into the uncharted expanse of deep space. The stars around them grew distant and unfamiliar in the vast silence that enveloped the ship. There was only the soft pulse of the distress signal guiding them deeper into the unknown. Captain Reed stood at the helm, watching the endless black stretch ahead of them. She had ordered the crew to remain focused, but even she couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at the back of her mind. Each second that passed felt like a step further away from everything they knew, and into something that no one could predict. The crew worked tirelessly in their stations, some at the communications console, others scanning the surrounding space for any signs of danger or anomalies. As they approached the coordinates, the signal was coming from strange phenomena, began to manifest. Their sensors began picking up unusual reading shifts in gravity, subtle but noticeable distortions in the space-time continuum, nothing too alarming, but enough to make everyone on board cautious. A few experts on the ship suspected that they were approaching a region of space where normal laws of physics didn't always apply. Something about the area seemed to warp reality itself. The distortion was faint, but the crew felt it in the air. An unspoken tension settled throughout the ship. Maya Solis, the ship's lead scientist, was particularly troubled. She had been studying the data with growing concern, and there was a hint of disbelief in her voice as she spoke to Captain Reed. "Captain, the closer we get to the coordinates, the stranger the readings become. It's as if this area of space is alive in some way." Elena glanced at her worriedly, but nodded, acknowledging Maya's expertise. "We'll take every precaution," she said, her voice firm, though she too could sense something unsettling about the place they were entering. As they neared the coordinates, the distress signal grew louder, more distinct, yet still strangely dissonant, like an unspoken plea from somewhere beyond their reach. Elena ordered a deceleration as they approached what seemed to be the outer boundary of the source, when suddenly the ship's communication system flickered, and a new voice emerged through the static. It was barely audible, but undeniably human. The voice sounded almost like it was trapped in a distant echo reverberating through space. but it was unmistakably a cry for help. "We're not alone," Captain Reed murmured under her breath as the voice cut through the silence of the ship. It was a chilling realization, but one that filled them with a renewed sense of urgency. The crew scrambled to adjust their systems and pinpoint the origin of the transmission. Their scanners picked up an anomaly ahead, a faint signal emanating from an object hidden within the darkness of the void. But what it was no one could say. At first it looked like a distortion, a shadow of some kind hanging in the emptiness. Yet as they got closer, the shape began to take form. It was a massive structure, one that appeared to have been constructed in the distant past by an advanced race. The edges of the object shimmered as though it existed in more than one dimension. At once an enormous ancient station or ship floating in space, and encased in the remains of something far older and far more terrifying than anything the crew had encountered before. The signal had been coming from here, from this relic of a lost age. And it was clear that whatever or whoever had sent the message was desperate to make contact with anyone who could hear it. Elena felt a cold shiver run down her spine as the horizon drew closer to the unknown relic ahead, but there was no turning back now. The decision was made, and they were already too deep into this mystery to back out. The team braced themselves for whatever lay beyond the dark threshold ahead. The Vornis system loomed ahead like a shadow in the depths of space. The stars around it seemed to blink in silent anticipation, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Rourke stood on the command deck of the Valiant, her fingers gripping the edge of the console as she stared at the swirling mass of asteroids and planetary debris that surrounded the enemy weapons cache. They were just moments away from entering the system, and every second counted. "Prepare for deceleration," Rourke ordered, her voice steady despite the pressure building in her chest. She could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders. This wasn't just a mission, it was a turning point. If they succeeded, the Triumvirate's ability to retaliate would be crippled, but if they failed, it would be disastrous. The Valiant was vulnerable, and they would be facing an army of heavily armed enemies, with the Triumvirate's full force already on alert. "Status report, Lieutenant," Rourke said, turning to Alvarez, who had been poring over the data feeds. "Scanners are picking up multiple enemy ships in the vicinity," Alvarez said, his voice tight. "They've detected us, Captain. We'll have to engage their fleet before we can hit the cache. I count at least 5 destroyers, and they're launching fighters. This is going to be a full-on fight." Rourke nodded. She had expected this. The Triumvirate would not take an attack on one of their most valuable assets lying down. They had been preparing for this moment, and now they had no choice but to see it through. The rebellion wasn't ready to face a full fleet head-on, but they didn't have the luxury of time. If they didn't act now, the weapons cache would be moved, or worse, reinforced with additional defenses. The Valiant had to strike, and it had to strike fast. "Move us into the asteroid field," Rourke ordered. "We'll use it as cover. They won't be able to target us effectively in there. Focus on taking down their fighters first. No direct confrontations with their big ships unless we absolutely have to." Alvarez didn't hesitate, immediately executing the maneuver. The Valiant plunged into the dense field of asteroids, using the unpredictable terrain to its advantage. Enemy fire streaked by, missing the Valiant by mere inches as the ship twisted and turned with unmatched agility. The first wave of enemy fighters appeared on the scanners, and Rourke's heart raced. The Valiant had already taken a few hits in the past battles, and its shields were weakened. It would be a battle of attrition, a dangerous dance of precision and timing. But humanity had proven time and again that it could survive the impossible. "Launch the interceptors," Rourke ordered. "We need to clear the skies." The Valiant's small fleet of attack craft, agile and well-trained, shot out from the hangar, weaving between asteroids and heading directly for the oncoming enemy fighters. The ship's weapon systems came alive, and for a moment, it was chaos. Laser blasts flashing in every direction as the two forces clashed in the void of space. Despite their superior numbers, the Triumvirate's forces struggled to keep up with the Valiant and its nimble escorts. The humans fought with a ferocity and unpredictability that the Empire had never encountered. The Valiant's smaller ships darted in and out of asteroid fields, using the natural cover to take down enemy fighters one by one. But even as they made progress, it was clear this fight was not one they could afford to drag out. The longer they fought, the more the Valiant exposed itself to heavier fire from the destroyers lurking in the distance. "Captain, we've cleared most of the fighters, but the destroyers are moving into firing range," Lieutenant Alvarez warned. "We don't have much time left. The cache is just ahead, but we need to disable their fleet first." Rourke's gaze hardened. The mission had always been the priority, but now, time was running out. They had to finish the fight, and fast. "We'll take down their lead destroyer first," she ordered. "Target the weapons systems and disable their ability to launch more fighters. We'll do it the Valiant way. Precision, not force." The ship's weapons roared to life, targeting the enemy destroyer. The Valiant danced through the asteroid field with uncanny agility, making precise shots that disabled the enemy ship's forward weapon arrays and communication systems. With one heavy blast, the destroyer's engines were crippled, and it drifted lifelessly in space, a massive hulk of twisted metal. "Direct hit," Alvarez said, his voice filled with relief. "The rest of the fleet is backing off." Rourke exhaled. Though the fight wasn't over yet, the remaining triumvirate ships would regroup, and the cache was still heavily guarded. But this was a victory, no matter how small, and it had bought them the time they needed to finish the job. The Valiant's crew had just proven something crucial. They were more than a thorn in the Empire's side. They were a force capable of bringing down the mightiest warships in the galaxy. "Move in," Rourke said. "We're hitting that cache before they can get their forces together." With the remaining enemy ships retreating in disarray, the Valiant closed in on the weapons cache. The final phase of their mission had begun. The rebellion's future and humanity's place in the galaxy hinged on this next move. The Valiant surged forward, its weapons systems humming with readiness as it approached the heavily fortified weapons cache, deep in the heart of the Vornis system. The enemy fleet had been pushed back, but they weren't entirely defeated. Rourke knew that even if the Triumvirate's warships had been neutralized, the weapons cache itself would still be a formidable challenge. The facility was protected by layers of advanced security, defensive shields, automated turrets, and a final line of soldiers ready to die to protect the Empire's most critical assets. But this wasn't the first time Rourke and her crew had faced impossible odds. As the Valiant glided through the asteroid field, the crew was already preparing for the ground assault that would follow. This mission was a two-pronged attack: destroy the weapons cache and its accompanying defense systems, then secure it for the rebellion. The Triumvirate had been hoarding enough firepower to devastate entire worlds, and taking it out would shift the balance of the war in the rebellion's favor. "Approaching the facility now, Captain," Alvarez reported. "Shields are up, but we got a clear path to the main entrance. Enemy forces are digging in, but they're scattered." "Good. Focus fire on the outer defenses," Rourke commanded. "We'll break through and deploy ground forces. This needs to be fast and clean. No surprises." The Valiant's massive energy cannons fired, sending shockwaves through the surrounding space. The first barrage tore through the outer turrets, disabling them before they could retaliate. The facility's energy shields shimmered, but the concentrated fire from the Valiant's assault craft quickly wore them down. Rourke's heart raced as the comms beeped. "Captain, enemy reinforcements are on the way," Lieutenant Nova said, her voice tense. "The remaining destroyers are regrouping. We need to finish this now before they can come back at us." Rourke's eyes narrowed, but she remained calm. "We have no choice. Drop the ground forces now. We'll hold the line here." Outside the ship, the hangar doors opened, and dozens of rebel assault shuttles descended toward the facility below. The Valiant's crew had trained for this moment. They were ready for the fight to come, knowing that once they hit the ground, there would be no turning back. This was their chance to make a final decisive strike against the heart of the Triumvirate's military power. Deploying ground teams, Rourke said, watching as the shuttle split up, each heading to different entry points. We need to secure the core, disable the backup systems, and get the tech out before they can lock down the facility. The Triumvirate won't let go of this place easily. On the surface, the Valiant's assault teams stormed the compound, their boots thundering against the metal floors as they stormed through blast doors and hallways. The defense forces stationed within the facility were formidable, their combat suits almost as advanced as the Triumvirate's own elite forces. But they weren't prepared for the human assault teams, who fought with ferocity, speed, and tactical ingenuity. The Triumvirate had relied on overwhelming force for too long. They had underestimated the resilience of those who had nothing left to lose. "We've reached the core." Sergeant Walker's voice rang out through the comms. "The main control systems are locked, but we're in. We just need a few more minutes to override their security." "Don't wait too long," Rourke responded, tension creeping into her voice. "We've got reinforcements on the way, and I'm not sure we'll have time to finish this if they get here." The team pushed forward, weapons blazing as they cleared the last line of resistance. The Valiant had held off the last remnants of the enemy fleet in orbit, but Rourke knew that the battle was far from over. They were about to be fighting on two fronts, both in space and on the ground. And they needed to succeed here if the rebellion was going to have a chance. Minutes later, the facility's control room was theirs. The team planted explosives on the remaining reactors and key systems, ensuring that nothing of value would fall back into enemy hands. As the last set of detonators was armed, Rourke's voice came over the comms, filled with a rare but resolute pride. "Mission accomplished," she said, her words resonating with her crew. "The Triumvirate has lost this battle, and they won't recover from this blow." The countdown began, the base's core flashing red as the explosives prepared to detonate. The team rushed back to the exit, making their way toward the extraction point where the assault shuttles waited. There was no time to lose. The Valiant was their lifeline, and they had to escape before the facility was obliterated in the final explosion. As the Valiant made its escape, the shockwaves of the explosion rippled outward, sending a brilliant burst of light into the blackness of space. The weapons cache was gone, and with it, a significant portion of the Triumvirate's military might. The rebellion had struck a decisive blow. Humanity had proven that it could take on the most powerful empire in the galaxy and win. The war was far from over, but the Valiant's crew had changed the tide of history. The Triumvirate was no longer invincible, and humanity, for the first time in millennia, had shown that they could not only survive in this galaxy, they could dominate it.